The cargo hold of the slave ship Crimson Reaper stank of fear, desperation, and the metallic tang of spilled blood. In the corner, pressed against the cold metal walls, 7-year-old Sarah Chen clutched a broken toy robot to her chest. Her parents had given it to her before the raiders came to New Shanghai Colony. That felt like a lifetime ago, though it had only been 3 days. Sarah didn't understand why the scary creatures with the red eyes had taken her from Mommy and Daddy. She didn't understand why they spoke in growls and clicks that hurt her ears. All she knew was that she was cold, hungry, and more frightened than she had ever been in her short life. The other prisoners in the hold were mostly adults from various species, blue-skinned Andorians, the tall tree-like Florans, even a few humans from other colonies. They whispered among themselves in different languages, but Sarah caught enough words to know they were all going to be sold to someone called the Dominion. The adults tried to comfort her when she cried, but their own terror was too great to hide. Above the slavehold, Captain Vexstar of the Crimson Reaper laughed as he counted the credits his cargo would bring. The Dominion Empire paid well for exotic species, and humans were particularly valuable right now. Something about their adaptability and emotional responses made them excellent subjects for the Empire's research facilities. Vexstar didn't care what they did with the slaves once he delivered them. Credits were credits. The ship was 3 days out from the drop-off point at Station Omega. 7 when the proximity alarms began screaming through the corridors. "Captain!" His first mate, a scarred Korthak named Grix, burst onto the bridge. "Unknown vessel approaching fast. They're not responding to our identification requests." Vexstar snarled, his mandibles clicking irritably. "Pirates? This deep in neutral space? Negative, sir. The signature is strange. I've never seen anything like it." Through the main view screen, a sleek vessel came into view. It was smaller than the Crimson Reaper, but moved with predatory grace. The hull was a deep blue-green that seemed to shimmer in the starlight, and instead of the harsh, angular lines of most military vessels, this ship had flowing curves that made it look almost organic. "Saphirian design," whispered the ship scanner operator, a nervous Tellarite. "I thought they were extinct." "Nearly extinct," Vexstar corrected. "The Dominion made sure of that a century ago. What's one of their ships doing out here?" His question was answered when a transmission crackled through their communications array. The voice that spoke was melodious, despite the universal translator's mechanical interpretation, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Slaver vessel, this is Commander Kailas of the Zephyrian ship Wind's Grace. We know what cargo you carry. Release your prisoners immediately, and we will allow you to depart unharmed." Vexstar's laughter was harsh and grating. "One little Zephyrian ship against the Crimson Reaper? You're either very brave or very stupid, Commander. My cargo is worth more than your entire dying civilization." "Then we are brave," came the calm reply. "You have 30 seconds to comply." "Lock weapons," Vexstar ordered. "Let's finish what the Dominion started." The battle was brief but fierce. The Wind's Grace moved like a dancer through space, avoiding the heavier weaponry of the slave ship while delivering precise strikes to its weapon systems and engines. Zephyrian technology was advanced despite their small numbers, and their ship's weapons seemed to bend and flow like liquid lightning. But the Crimson Reaper was 3 times larger and had military-grade shielding. For every hit the Zephyrian scored, Vexstar's gunners managed to land devastating blows on the smaller vessel. Plasma fire scorched the Wind's Grace's hull, and atmosphere vented from multiple breaches. In the slavehold, Sarah and the other prisoners were thrown around as the ship bucked and rolled. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red shadows, and the sound of metal tearing and systems failing filled the air. Several prisoners were injured when cargo containers broke loose and crashed into the crowd. "The ship's breaking apart!" shouted one of the human prisoners, a middle-aged woman named Dr. Martinez. "We need to get to the escape pods." But the slavehold was locked from the outside, and their captors had welded the emergency releases. They were trapped. Aboard the Wind's Grace, Commander Kailas watched his beautiful ship dying around him. His crew of 12 had fought bravely, but they were outgunned. His navigator, Sub-Commander Thelwyn, had been killed when plasma fire breached the bridge. His weapons officer lay unconscious with severe burns. "Commander," his communications officer called out, her voice weak from blood loss. "The slave ship is preparing to jump to hyperspace. If they escape now, we'll never catch them." Kailas looked at the tactical display. His ship was crippled, his crew was dying, and in a few minutes the slavers would disappear with their cargo of innocent lives. In the hold of that ship was at least one human child. He had picked up her biosignature during their scans. The Zephyrians had no love for humans, but neither did they allow children to be sold into slavery regardless of species. There was only one option left. "All hands, abandon ship," he ordered quietly. "Commander?" His communications officer stared at him in shock. "Take the remaining crew to the escape pods. Set course for the nearest inhabitable system." Kylus's hands moved across his control panel with fluid precision. "I'm going to ram the Reaper. Maybe I can disable their hyperdrive." "Sir, that's suicide. It's duty." Kylus smiled, a gentle expression that transformed his angular alien features. "The Zephyrian Codex is clear. The protection of innocence supersedes all other concerns, even our own lives." The remaining crew reluctantly evacuated to the escape pods while Kylus remained on the bridge. He rerouted all remaining power to the engines and locked his ship on a collision course with the Crimson Reaper's engine section. The impact was catastrophic. The wind's grace tore through the slaver ship's hull like a spear, her reinforced prow designed for ramming maneuvers cutting deep into the larger vessel's superstructure. Both ships spun wildly through space, atmosphere, and debris, creating a glittering cloud around the wreckage. But Kylus had aimed true. The Crimson Reaper's hyperdrive was destroyed, along with most of her engine systems. She was dead in space, and her hull was breached in dozens of places. In the slave hold, the impact had blown open the main door. The prisoners found themselves free but trapped on a dying ship. Emergency bulkheads were sealing throughout the vessel, and life support was failing section by section. Dr. Martinez took charge, organizing the survivors. "We need to get to the escape pods, stay together, help the injured." Sarah stumbled through the chaos, still clutching her broken toy. The corridor outside the hold was filled with smoke and the acrid smell of burning circuitry. Sparks fell like snow from damaged systems, and in the distance she could hear the terrifying sounds of the ship tearing itself apart. "This way!" Martinez called, but as they moved down the corridor, a massive support beam crashed down, separating Sarah from the group. She was alone on the wrong side of the wreckage, trapped in a section of ship that was losing atmosphere fast. That's when she saw him. Commander Kylus had somehow survived the impact and was moving through the wreckage of both ships, searching for survivors. His breathing apparatus was cracked, leaking precious air, and blue blood seeped from multiple wounds. But his large dark eyes were still alert, still determined. When he saw Sarah, trapped and crying behind the fallen beam, he didn't hesitate. The beam was too heavy for his injured body to lift, but the Zephyrian managed to wedge a piece of debris under it and create a lever. Slowly, painfully, he raised the beam just enough for the small human child to crawl through. "It's okay, little one," he whispered in accented standard, his voice gentle despite his pain. "I'm going to get you out of here." Sarah looked up at the alien creature, tall and slender with blue-scaled skin and features that reminded her of the pictures of angels in her grandmother's old books. His movements were graceful even in injury, and his eyes were kind. "Are you one of the good guys?" she asked in the simple way children do. Kylus smiled, though the expression was weak. "I try to be." He lifted her carefully, and together they made their way through the dying ship toward the escape pod bays. Behind them, sections of the vessel were already being sealed off as the automated systems tried to prevent complete atmospheric loss. They reached the escape pod bay just as the last of the other survivors was boarding the final functional pod. Dr. Martinez saw them coming and held the door. "Hurry!" she called. But as they ran toward the pod, another section of ceiling collapsed. This time, Kylus wasn't fast enough to avoid it completely. A massive chunk of metal caught him across the back, driving him to his knees. He managed to push Sarah forward, into Dr. Martinez's waiting arms before the debris pinned him to the deck. "Go!" he gasped, his breathing apparatus finally failing completely. "Take her and go! We can't leave you!" Dr. Martinez protested, but the ship was shaking apart around them, and the escape pod's automatic launch sequence had already begun. Kylus looked at Sarah one last time. The human child was safe. That was what mattered. "Tell her people," he whispered. "Tell them the Zephyrians remember honor." The escape pod launched just as the final bulkheads failed. The last thing Sarah saw through the small porthole was the brave alien commander, sitting alone in the collapsing ship, watching to make sure they had escaped safely. 3 days later, a human patrol vessel found the escape pods drifting near the wreckage of both ships. The survivors were rescued, including Sarah Chen, who clutched her broken toy robot and kept asking about the nice blue man who saved me. The rescue ship's captain, Marcus Webb, listened to Dr. Martinez's account with growing amazement and fury. Amazement at the courage of an unknown alien who had given his life to save strangers. Fury at the Dominion slavers who had dared to take human children. When they reached Earth, Sarah's story spread like wildfire through the colonies. The image of a dying Zephyrian commander sacrificing himself to save a human child captured the imagination of an entire species. Here was an alien race that embodied the ideals humanity claimed to value: honor, sacrifice, and the protection of innocence. Within a week, the story had reached the highest levels of Earth's government. In the marble halls of the Terran Assembly, politicians who had spent years debating trade agreements and territory disputes suddenly found themselves discussing something entirely different: honor. President Elena Vasquez called an emergency session of the Assembly. As she stood before the representatives of 100 human worlds, her voice carried across the galaxy via quantum relay. "Fellow humans," she began, "we have learned of a species that embodies the very best of what we aspire to be. The Zephyrians, nearly extinct and facing annihilation by the Dominion Empire, chose to save one of our children rather than preserve themselves. Commander Kai Les gave his life so that Sarah Chen could live." The assembly hall was silent as she continued. "For too long we have stood by while stronger powers have bullied the weak. We have been content to remain neutral while species like the Zephyrians faced extinction. That ends today." She paused, looking out at the assembled representatives. "I am announcing the formation of the Terran Protection Doctrine. Any species that has shown courage and honor in defense of human life will be considered under Earth's protection. This is not mere diplomacy. This is a sacred promise." The vote was unanimous. Across the galaxy, in the remaining Zephyrian settlements, the news was received with a mixture of hope and disbelief. Could the humans really mean it? Could one species' gesture of compassion truly change the balance of power in their favor? Sub-Commander Thelwyn, one of the few survivors of the Wind's Grace, spoke for his people when he transmitted a message to Earth. Commander Kylus believed that honor was its own reward. "We never expected anything in return for doing what was right. If humanity truly means what it says, then perhaps there is still hope for honor in this galaxy." But in the dark reaches of Dominion space, Emperor Zarketh received the news with cold fury. The Zephyrians were meant to be extinct within the year. Their small population and dwindling resources made them easy prey. Now the humans, with their vast fleets and aggressive expansion, were claiming them as protected? This would not stand. The Dominion had spent centuries establishing its dominance through fear and overwhelming force. If they allowed this challenge to go unanswered, other species might begin to think they could defy the Empire with impunity. Zarketh summoned his war council. It was time to teach both the Zephyrians and their human protectors a lesson about the price of defiance. The galaxy would learn that the Dominion's rule was absolute, and that mercy was a luxury reserved for the strong. As he planned his attack on the Zephyrian worlds, the Emperor had no idea that he was about to discover why humanity had earned a reputation as the galaxy's most dangerous species when aroused to anger. He was about to learn that when humans made a promise to protect something, they meant it with every fiber of their being. The child Sarah Chen was safe on Earth, playing with the new toy robot and slowly forgetting the trauma of her capture. But the memory of the kind blue man who had saved her would remain with her forever, and humanity would ensure that his sacrifice was not in vain. The stage was set for a war that would reshape the galaxy. On one side stood the ancient Dominion Empire with its vast fleets and ruthless efficiency. On the other stood a species that had just discovered something it was willing to die for: the principle that courage and honor deserved protection, regardless of the cost. In the depths of space, the wreckage of the Wind's Grace and the Crimson Reaper continued their eternal drift, a monument to the moment when everything changed. And in the silence between the stars, the ghost of Commander Kylus could rest peacefully, knowing that his sacrifice had not been forgotten. 6 months had passed since President Vasquez's declaration, and the galaxy was watching Earth with nervous anticipation. The Terran Protection Doctrine had been more than just words. Human ships had already begun patrolling Zephyrian space, and trade agreements had been established to help the struggling species rebuild their economy. Admiral Sarah Hassan stood on the bridge of the flagship Indomitable, watching the blue-green world of Zephyr Prime rotating slowly beneath them. The planet was beautiful but scarred, with vast empty cities that had once housed millions. The Dominion's systematic campaign of genocide had reduced the Zephyrian population from 40 billion to less than 3 million scattered across 12 worlds. "Admiral," Communications Officer Chen reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the surface. It's Sub-Commander Thelwyn." Hassan nodded. Thelwyn had become the unofficial leader of his people after the loss of so many military commanders. The Zephyrian was intelligent, honorable, and pragmatic, exactly the kind of leader his species needed during these dark times. Put him through. The view screen shimmered, revealing the tall, graceful form of Sub-Commander Thelwyn. His blue scales were marked with the ritual scars of mourning, but his dark eyes held a spark of hope that hadn't been there months ago. Admiral Hassan, he said, his voice carrying the musical quality common to his species. Thank you for coming. We have disturbing news from our deep space monitors. What kind of news? Dominion fleet movements. 3 battle groups have left their staging areas and are converging on the outer rim. Our intelligence suggests they're preparing for a major offensive. Hassan felt a cold knot form in her stomach. The Dominion Empire was ancient and vast, controlling over 200 systems through a combination of military might and terror. Their technology was advanced, their fleets numerous, and their soldiers were bred for war from birth.
Do you know their target?
Thelwyn's expression grew grim. Us, Admiral. All indications point to a final assault on the remaining Zephyrian worlds. The Emperor apparently views your protection as a direct challenge to Dominion authority. How long do we have? 2 months, perhaps 3. They're moving slowly, likely to allow fear to build among our populations. It's a typical Dominion tactic. Admiral Hassan was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. The human fleet was strong but not limitless. They had never faced an enemy like the Dominion Empire, and the thought of going to war against such a powerful foe was daunting. But then she remembered the reports about Commander Kailas, about his sacrifice to save a human child. The Zephyrians had risked everything to do what was right. How could humanity do any less? Sub-Commander, she said finally, you have my word that Earth will honor its commitment. The Dominion will have to go through us to reach your people. Relief flooded Thelwyn's features. Admiral, you cannot know what this means to us. After so many years of running and hiding, to finally have someone stand with us. The question is, Hassan continued, what can your people do to help? We're going to need every advantage we can get. Our military is small, but our remaining ships are advanced. We have intimate knowledge of Dominion tactics and technology. And, Thelwyn paused, as if weighing his words carefully, there are other species in the Outer Rim who have suffered under Dominion rule. The Corvani, the Deltans, the hive worlds of the Arcturus Collective. If they believe there was truly hope of victory, they might join us. Hassan leaned forward. You're talking about building a coalition. A rebellion, Admiral. The Dominion rules through fear, but that same fear has created countless enemies. If we can show them that the Empire can be defeated, that there's finally hope for freedom, the possibilities were intriguing. A galaxy-wide rebellion against Dominion rule would certainly level the playing field, but it would also mean a war on a scale that humanity had never seen. I'll need to discuss this with Earth Command, Hassan said. But I like the way you think, Sub-Commander. 2 weeks later, President Vasquez convened an emergency meeting of the Terran Defense Council in the underground bunkers beneath Geneva. The attendees included the heads of Earth's military, intelligence services, and diplomatic corps. The discussion was heated and prolonged. Madam President, General Morrison of the Army argued, we're talking about war with the most powerful empire in the galaxy. The Dominion has been conquering and enslaving species for over 1,000 years. Their military technology is centuries ahead of ours in some areas. And yet they've never faced humanity, countered Admiral Chen of the Navy. Our psychological profiles suggest they rely heavily on intimidation and overwhelming force. They may not be prepared for an enemy that fights back with our level of determination. Secretary of Defense Williams spread holographic star charts across the conference table. The logistics alone are staggering. We'd be fighting across dozens of systems, thousands of light years from our supply bases. The Dominion will have every advantage. Except one, President Vasquez said quietly. They don't have what we have, which is a cause worth dying for. The president stood and walked to the massive wall display showing the galaxy's political boundaries. Dominion space was a dark red cancer spreading across the eastern spiral arm. Gentlemen, we've been having the wrong conversation. We're talking about whether we can win a war against the Dominion. But that's not really the question, is it? The room fell silent as she continued. The real question is, what kind of species do we want to be? Do we want to be the kind of people who make grand speeches about protecting the innocent and then abandon them when the cost gets too high? Or do we want to be the kind of people who keep their promises regardless of the consequences? General Morrison shifted uncomfortably. Madam President, with respect, noble ideals won't stop Dominion battlecruisers. Won't they? Vasquez turned back to face the council. I've been reading reports from our intelligence division about Dominion military doctrine. They win through shock and awe, through convincing their enemies that resistance is futile. What happens when they encounter an enemy that simply refuses to quit? Director Hayes of the Intelligence Service cleared her throat. Actually, Madam President, there are some interesting precedents. The Dominion's expansion has slowed considerably in the last century. They've been consolidating their territory rather than conquering new systems. Our analysts believe it's because they've encountered increasing resistance from smaller coalitions of worlds. Go on, the Empire is vast, but that's also a weakness. They have to maintain control over hundreds of conquered species, many of whom are looking for any sign of weakness. If we can demonstrate that the Dominion can be successfully opposed, it could trigger revolts throughout their territory, Admiral Chen finished. Classic insurgency warfare on a galactic scale? President Vasquez smiled grimly. Which brings us back to Sub-Commander Thelwyn's proposal. We don't have to beat the entire Dominion Empire, we just have to beat them badly enough to prove that they can be beaten. The debate continued for hours, but gradually a consensus emerged. Humanity would honor its commitment to the Zephyrians. More than that, they would use the coming conflict as an opportunity to fundamentally alter the balance of power in the galaxy. The plan that emerged was ambitious beyond anything humanity had ever attempted. Operation Starlight would begin with a massive military buildup in Zephyrian space, using human industrial capacity to rapidly construct shipyards and defense installations. Simultaneously, diplomatic missions would be sent to every species that had suffered under Dominion rule, offering them hope in exchange for their support. Meanwhile, back in Dominion space, Emperor Zarketh was putting the finishing touches on his own plans. The throne room of his flagship, Dark Dominion, was a study in intimidation. Black metal surfaces, blood-red lighting, and the preserved heads of conquered enemy leaders mounted on the walls. "Report," the Emperor commanded as War Master Kraulex entered the chamber. The Dominion's supreme military commander was a product of their genetic enhancement programs, 9 feet tall, with natural armor plating and muscles enhanced by cybernetic implants. His voice was a mechanical growl that had terrified countless enemies. "The fleets are assembled, Emperor. 250 ships of the line, including 12 dreadnoughts, more than enough to exterminate the remaining Zephyrian worlds." "And the humans?" "Their fleet is impressive for such a young species, but small. Perhaps 50 ships total, and most of them are in their home systems." They may have promised to protect the Zephyrians, but they lacked the military strength to make that promise meaningful. Zarketh stood from his throne, a figure of dark majesty wrapped in the ceremonial robes of his ancestors. The Dominion imperial family had ruled for 40 generations, and their power had never been seriously challenged. "You underestimate them, War Master. I have been studying reports about this species called humanity." "Unusual. In what way, Emperor?" "They form emotional attachments to strangers. They make promises based on abstract concepts like honor and justice. Most remarkably, they sometimes keep those promises even when it would be more practical to break them." The Emperor's laugh was cold and mirthless. "In short, they are fools. But fools can be dangerous if they are not handled properly." Quote, "What are your orders? We will make an example of both species. The Zephyrians will be exterminated as planned, but the humans will be made to watch. We will force them to see the consequences of their misplaced compassion. Then we will offer them a choice: withdraw their protection from our other enemies, or watch their own colonies burn." War Master Kraulex nodded approvingly. It was a strategy the Dominion had used successfully for centuries. Show overwhelming force, demonstrate the futility of resistance, and then offer terms that allowed the enemy to surrender with minimal loss of face. And if they refuse, then we will teach the galaxy that there are worse things than death. The humans value their civilians highly, yes? We will take their colonies one by one, and we will broadcast the results across every civilized system. When other species see what happens to those who oppose us, they will remember why the Dominion's rule has gone unchallenged for so long. While the Emperor planned atrocities, something remarkable was happening in the depths of human space. Every major colony had begun contributing to the war effort, not because they were ordered to, but because they wanted to. The story of Commander Kailas had resonated with something deep in the human psyche. On New Geneva, factories that had produced luxury goods were retooled to manufacture military hardware. On Kepler Prime, entire universities had dedicated their research departments to developing new weapons and defense systems. On the agricultural worlds of the frontier, farmers worked around the clock to stockpile food supplies for the coming conflict. Perhaps most remarkably, tens of thousands of civilians had volunteered for military service. Many of them cited the same reason. They had seen what one alien species was willing to sacrifice to save a human child, and they wanted to prove worthy of that sacrifice. Dr. Elizabeth Martinez, the woman who had helped rescue Sarah Chen from the slave ship, had become one of the most vocal advocates for the war effort. Her speeches were broadcast across human space, and her words had inspired a generation. "They ask me why we should risk everything for a species we barely know," she said during one widely viewed address. "I tell them, go look at a 7-year-old girl named Sarah Chen. Look at her smile, her laughter, her innocent trust in the goodness of the universe. That smile exists because a dying alien warrior chose to save her life instead of his own. That trust exists because someone she had never met decided that her life was worth preserving. Dr. Martinez paused, looking directly into the camera. "We don't fight for the Zephyrians because we know them. We fight for them because they showed us who we want to be. They showed us that honor isn't just a word. It's a choice you make when everything is on the line." The response to such speeches was extraordinary. Recruitment centers were overwhelmed with volunteers. Industrial production reached levels not seen since the Great Colonial Expansion. Most importantly, humanity was uniting behind a common cause in a way that hadn't happened for generations. In his private study aboard the Indomitable, Admiral Hassan reviewed the latest intelligence reports with growing amazement. The Zephyrians had been right. Species throughout the galaxy were responding to news of the coming confrontation. The Corvani had pledged their small but technologically advanced fleet. The Deltans offered their expertise in stealth technology. The Arcturus Collective, a group of insectoid species with a hive-mind intelligence, had begun moving their mobile shipyards toward the conflict zone. Most surprisingly, even species that had never been directly threatened by the Dominion were offering support. The crystalline entities of the Gemini cluster had volunteered to serve as communication relays. The energy-based lifeforms of the pulsar states offered to disrupt Dominion sensor networks. It seemed that the mere possibility of successfully opposing the Empire had given hope to beings across the galaxy. Hassan's contemplation was interrupted by an urgent communication from Earth Command. President Vasquez appeared on his screen, her expression grave. "Admiral, we've just received intelligence from our deep space monitors. The Dominion fleet has begun moving towards Zephyrian space. War Master Kralax himself is leading the assault." "How long do we have?" 6 weeks, maybe less. They're not trying to hide their movements. Quite the opposite. They want us to see them coming. Hassan nodded grimly. It was a classic intimidation tactic, designed to allow fear to build among the defenders. And our fleet status? 97 ships of the line are ready for combat, with another 35 arriving within the month. It's not enough to match them ship for ship, but with our allies, it might be enough. Hassan stood, feeling the weight of command settling on his shoulders. In 6 weeks, they would discover whether humanity's promise of protection was backed by the strength to enforce it. "Admiral," the President continued, "I want you to know that whatever happens, you have the full support of Earth and all our colonies. Don't try to fight fair. Don't worry about civilian casualties on Dominion ships. These people have spent centuries conquering and enslaving others. Show them what happens when they threaten something humanity cares about." After the transmission ended, Hassan remained standing at his viewport, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the largest fleet in galactic history was preparing to destroy everything he had sworn to protect. The Dominion had every advantage: numbers, experience, superior technology in many areas. But they had made one critical error. They had assumed that humanity's promise was just another diplomatic nicety, easily abandoned when the cost became too high. They were about to learn that when humans made certain kinds of promises, they meant them with a fierce determination that had carried their species from a single world to the stars. The final preparations began in earnest. Human ships took up positions throughout the Zephyrian system. Allied vessels arrived daily, creating the largest coalition fleet in recorded history. On the surface of Zephyr Prime, civilians were evacuated to underground shelters that had been hastily constructed with human engineering expertise. In the command center of the main human base, Sub-Commander Thelwyn worked alongside Admiral Hassan and the other Alliance commanders. The cooperation between species was remarkable. Beings who had never met before were coordinating complex military operations with an efficiency that spoke to their shared determination. "Admiral," Thelwyn said during one planning session, "I want you to know that regardless of the outcome, my people will remember what you have done for us. The children being born in our shelters will grow up knowing that there are species in this universe willing to fight for justice, not just their own survival." Hassan smiled, thinking of a 7-year-old girl playing safely on Earth. "Sub-Commander, your people taught us what courage looks like. We're just trying to live up to the example Commander Kylus set. As the Dominion fleet drew closer, the galaxy held its breath. The coming battle would determine more than the fate of the Zephyrians. It would decide whether the ancient tyrannies that ruled the stars could be successfully challenged, whether honor was stronger than fear, and whether one small act of courage could indeed change the course of history." In the darkness between the stars, two philosophies were about to collide with devastating force. The Dominion fleet emerged from hyperspace like a plague of metal locusts, their massive forms blotting out the stars. 250 ships arranged in perfect formation, their black hulls adorned with the crimson lightning symbol of the Empire. At their head rode the Dark Dominion itself, Emperor Zarketh's flagship, a dreadnought so massive that it had its own gravitational field. Admiral Hassan watched from the bridge of the Indomitable as the enemy fleet took position at the edge of the Zephyr system. The Human Alliance fleet was outnumbered 2-1, but they had chosen their defensive positions carefully. The asteroid belt between the fourth and fifth planets provided excellent cover, and the unique gravitational anomalies around Zephyr Prime's 3 moons would make it difficult for the larger Dominion ships to maneuver effectively.
All ships, this is Admiral Hassan, he broadcast on the Alliance command frequency.
Remember, we're not here to win a traditional space battle. We're here to prove that the Dominion can bleed. Every ship we destroy, every minute we hold them off, sends a message to the entire galaxy that these tyrants can be beaten. The response was immediate and fierce. Human voices mixed with the melodious tones of the Zephyrians, the harmonic resonance of the Corvani, and the clicking communications of the Arcturus collective. Over 100 different species had sent representatives to this battle, and they were united by a single purpose. On the Dark Dominion, Emperor Zarketh studied the defensive formation with interest. The enemy had arranged themselves in overlapping fields of fire, using the system's natural features to maximize their advantages. It was competent, even clever. But it wouldn't be enough. War Master Kralex, the Emperor commanded, begin the demonstration. The War Master's mechanical voice echoed through the bridge. By your command, Emperor, all ships advance to attack formation. Target the outermost defensive line. The Dominion fleet moved forward with predatory grace, their weapon systems charging with deadly light. The lead elements were heavy cruisers designed to punch through enemy defenses and create openings for the dreadnoughts. Their tactics had been perfected over centuries of conquest, overwhelming firepower applied with surgical precision. But as they closed to weapons range, something unexpected happened. The human ships didn't retreat or try to avoid contact. Instead, they accelerated directly toward the advancing Dominion forces. What are they doing? War Master Kralex wondered aloud. They're abandoning their defensive positions. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Hassan watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. The Dominion was about to learn the first lesson about fighting humanity. Humans didn't always follow the established rules of warfare. All ships, he broadcast, execute Operation Thunder Run. We're trying to get inside their formation and cause maximum chaos. The human fleet split into 3 groups, each one diving toward a different section of the Dominion advance. Their ships were smaller and faster than the Imperial vessels, and they used that speed ruthlessly. Fighters and destroyers weaved between the massive enemy dreadnoughts, targeting weapons arrays and sensor clusters with suicidal determination. The Defiant, a human heavy cruiser, rammed directly into the side of a Dominion battleship at full speed. The explosion lit up space like a miniature star, and when the light faded, both ships were gone. But the debris from the collision disabled 2 more enemy vessels and created a gap in their formation that other human ships immediately exploited. Madness, War Master Kralex breathed. They're destroying their own ships. No, Emperor Zarketh corrected, his voice thoughtful. They're trading their ships for ours, and they consider it a fair trade. The battle became a furious melee as the disciplined Dominion formation devolved into chaos. Human ships darted between the massive Imperial vessels like wolves among buffalo, striking at weak points and vanishing before the enemy could respond. The Zephyrian vessels contributed their advanced sensor technology, providing targeting data that allowed the human gunners to hit critical systems with devastating accuracy. But the Dominion had numbers and firepower. For every Imperial ship that fell, 2 Alliance vessels were destroyed. The Indomitable shook under repeated hits from enemy plasma cannons, her shields flickering dangerously. Admiral, Captain Rodriguez reported, we've lost contact with the Yorktown and the Wellington. The Saratoga is reporting heavy damage. Hassan nodded grimly. They were losing the battle by any conventional measure, but that wasn't the point. Signal all ships to implement Protocol 7. Protocol 7 was something that existed in no military manual. It was a desperate last-resort tactic that Admiral Hassan had developed specifically for this battle. Every human ship would link their computer systems, creating a single, coordinated intelligence that could react faster than any individual crew. The effect was immediate and startling. The human ships began moving with perfect coordination, anticipating each other's actions, and covering each other's weaknesses with mechanical precision. When the Constitution lost her main engines, 3 other ships immediately moved to shield her while she conducted emergency repairs. When the Enterprise ran low on ammunition, the Lexington transferred her entire weapons complement via emergency shuttle, but the most remarkable change was in the way they attacked. Instead of individual ships engaging individual targets, the entire human fleet began functioning like a single organism. They would concentrate overwhelming firepower on a single enemy vessel, destroy it completely, and then move on to the next target before the Dominion could adjust their tactics. On the Dominion flagship, War Master Kralex watched his perfectly organized fleet being torn apart by what should have been an inferior enemy. Emperor, we're losing ships at an unacceptable rate. Request permission to withdraw to attack range and use long-range bombardment. Denied, Zarkith replied coldly. If we withdraw now, every species in the galaxy will see it as retreat. Continue the attack. But Emperor, you have your orders, War Master. The battle raged for 6 hours. The space around Zephyr Prime became a graveyard of twisted metal and floating debris. Both sides paid a terrible price. The Alliance lost over 60 ships while the Dominion fleet was reduced by nearly half. But then something happened that changed everything. The Dark Dominion herself entered the battle. The Emperor's flagship was a monster of space warfare, bristling with enough firepower to level a planet. Her shields could withstand the combined firepower of a dozen battleships, and her main gun, a planet killer designed for orbital bombardment, could vaporize any ship in the Alliance fleet with a single shot. As the massive dreadnought moved toward the center of the battle, the smaller ships on both sides scattered like frightened fish. Her first shot obliterated the Zephyrian cruiser Windsong instantly. Her second destroyed the human destroyer, Courage. Within minutes, she had carved a path of destruction through the Alliance formation. All ships, Admiral Hassan broadcast, his voice calm despite the desperation of their situation, concentrate fire on the flagship. Everything we have. The surviving Alliance vessels turned their guns on the Dark Dominion, but their weapons were like pinpricks against her massive bulk. Her shields absorbed the punishment without even flickering, and her return fire was devastating. That's when Subcommander Thelwyn made a decision that would echo through history. The Zephyrian commander was aboard his own ship, the Honor's Price, one of the last surviving vessels of his people's fleet. As he watched the Dark Dominion systematically destroying the ships that had come to defend his world, he remembered the words of his old commander: "The protection of innocence supersedes all other concerns, even our own lives. All crew to escape pods," he ordered quietly. "Abandon ship immediately!" "Commander," his navigator asked in confusion, "our engines are still functional. We can still fight. Not the way I intend to fight." Thelwyn's hands moved across his control panel with the same fluid grace that Commander Kylus had shown months ago. "I'm going to ram the flagship. Commander, that's suicide. The Dark Dominion is too large. Even if you hit her, you won't do enough damage to matter." Thelwyn smiled, thinking of a human child named Sarah Chen. "I'm not trying to destroy her, my friend. I'm trying to give our allies an opportunity." As the escape pods launched from the Honor's Price, Thelwyn set course for the enemy flagship. But he wasn't aiming for her hull. He was aiming for something much more specific: the massive sensor array that dominated the Dreadnought's forward section. The Zephyrian ship accelerated toward the Dark Dominion at maximum speed. Enemy gunners tried to target the small vessel, but Thelwyn's piloting was flawless. He wove through the defensive fire like a dancer, his ship's advanced maneuvering systems allowing him to avoid destruction right up to the moment of impact. The Honor's Price struck the sensor array at nearly the speed of light. The explosion was relatively small by the standards of space warfare, but it had exactly the effect Thelwyn had intended. The Dark Dominion sensors went dark, leaving the massive ship effectively blind. "Now," Admiral Hassan shouted, "all ships, target the flagship. She can't see us coming." The surviving Alliance vessels converged on the Dark Dominion from all directions. Without her sensors, the mighty Dreadnought couldn't track the smaller, faster ships that swarmed around her like angry wasps. Human fighters dove into her weapon ports, detonating their nuclear warheads inside her gun batteries. Corvani stealth ships attached themselves to her hull and began cutting through her armor with plasma torches. For the first time in over a century, the Emperor's flagship was in genuine danger. On the bridge of the Dark Dominion, alarms wailed as system after system went offline. Emperor Zarketh stood motionless in the center of the chaos, his expression unreadable. "Emperor," War Master Kralex reported, his mechanical voice strained. "We've lost main weapons, secondary shields, and maneuvering control. The enemy is boarding us on 17 different levels." "How many ships do we have left?" Fewer than 100, most of those are damaged. The Emperor was silent for a long moment, processing the impossible reality that his invincible fleet was being defeated by a ragtag coalition of species that should have been easily crushed.
"Signal the fleet to withdraw," he said finally.
"Emperor, you heard me, War Master. Signal full retreat. We will reassess our strategy from a safe distance." But even as the surviving Dominion ships began to disengage, it was clear that the damage was done. The mighty Imperial fleet had been bloodied, their legendary invincibility shattered. Across the galaxy, species that had lived in terror of the Dominion's power were receiving reports of the battle, and for the first time in centuries, they were beginning to hope. On the surface of Zephyr Prime, the civilian population emerged from their shelters to see the sky filled with debris from both fleets. They had survived. Their world was safe. And they owed it all to species they had barely known existed a year ago. In the command center of the human base, Admiral Hassan surveyed the cost of victory. They had lost over half their ships, and thousands of brave souls had given their lives. But they had achieved something that many had thought impossible. They had forced the Dominion Empire to retreat. Admiral, his communications officer reported, were receiving transmissions from across the galaxy. Dozens of species are pledging support to the Alliance. The hegemony of independent worlds has declared war on the Dominion. The Free Trade Federation is mobilizing their defense fleets. Hassan smiled grimly. Subcommander Thelwyn had been right. The galaxy had been waiting for someone to prove that the Dominion could be beaten. Now that the proof existed, the Empire's enemies were crawling out of the shadows. But as he looked at the tactical display showing the retreating Dominion fleet, Hassan knew this was only the beginning. They had won a single battle, not the war. The Emperor would be back, and next time he would be prepared for humanity's unconventional tactics. Still, as reports continued to arrive from across the galaxy, species declaring independence, Dominion governors being overthrown, entire sectors rising in rebellion, Hassan felt a surge of pride. The sacrifice of Commander Kailas had started something that would reshape the balance of power in the universe. In her shelter on the surface, little Sarah Chen looked up at the stars through a crack in the protective ceiling. She didn't understand the battle that had just been fought, or the larger war that was beginning. But somehow she felt that the kind blue man who had saved her would be proud of what had happened here today. The first battle was over, but the real war, the war for the soul of the galaxy, was just beginning. On Earth, President Vasquez addressed the Terran Assembly with tears in her eyes. Today, humanity kept its promise. Today, we proved that honor is not weakness, that compassion is not folly. Today, we showed the galaxy that there are still species willing to fight for what is right, regardless of the cost. The applause that followed could be heard across the solar system. But in the quiet moments afterward, as the political leaders planned their next moves and the military commanders prepared for the battles to come, everyone understood the same fundamental truth. They had crossed a line from which there was no return. Humanity had declared war on the oldest, most powerful empire in the galaxy, and they had done it to honor a promise made to a dying alien who had saved a human child. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The age of cowering before tyrants was over. The age of human protection had begun. 3 months after the Battle of Zephyr Prime, the galaxy was in chaos. The Dominion Empire, which had ruled through fear and overwhelming force for over a millennium, suddenly found itself fighting brushfire wars across dozens of star systems. Species that had been conquered centuries ago were rising in rebellion, emboldened by the impossible news that the Imperial fleet had actually been defeated. Emperor Zarketh stood in his private chamber aboard the rebuilt Dark Dominion, staring out at the red giant star that illuminated the Empire's capital system. His reflection in the armored transparisteel showed a being aged beyond his years, the weight of failing empire etched into every line of his face. "Report," he commanded, as War Master Kralex entered the chamber. The cybernetic commander's voice was more mechanical than ever, damaged vocal systems giving his words a grinding quality. "The situation continues to deteriorate, Emperor. The hegemony of independent worlds has formally joined the Human Alliance. The Corvani technocracy has declared a trade embargo against all Dominion systems. Most seriously, 3 entire sectors in the Outer Rim have declared independence and are actively resisting our peacekeeping forces." Is that what we're calling them now? "Emperor, we control less than 60% of our former territory. Our military is stretched thin trying to maintain order, and recruitment numbers are down across all conquered species. Many of our subject worlds are experiencing what their populations call liberation movements." The Emperor turned from the window, his expression cold with fury. "And the humans? Intelligence reports suggest they are coordinating the rebellion through something they call the Galactic Freedom Network. They provide military advisors, weapons technology, and strategic coordination to any species willing to fight against us. Their industrial capacity has increased threefold since the Battle of Zephyr Prime, and they're using it entirely for military production. How is that possible? They're a young species with limited resources. Because they're not fighting alone anymore, Emperor. The Zephyrians have shared their advanced manufacturing techniques. The Deltans are providing stealth technology. The Arcturus Collective is building ships faster than we can destroy them. The humans have created what they call a liberation fleet, over 500 ships from 30 different species, all united under human command. Zarketh was silent for a long moment, processing the magnitude of the disaster. A single act of alien compassion toward a human child had triggered a galactic revolution. It was almost too absurd to believe. "What do our analysts say about human psychology?" he asked finally. "That we fundamentally misunderstood them, Emperor. We assumed they were like us, that their promises were strategic tools to be discarded when inconvenient. Instead, they appear to be a species that forms genuine emotional bonds with strangers and will make enormous sacrifices to honor abstract principles. In other words, they're insane. By our standards, yes, but their insanity is proving remarkably effective." Meanwhile, in the Human Command Center on Zephyr Prime, Admiral Hassan was coordinating the most complex military operation in galactic history. The liberation of the Corvani homeworld was proceeding ahead of schedule, while simultaneous operations in the Vega and Centauri sectors were achieving their objectives with minimal casualties. The transformation of Zephyr Prime itself was remarkable. What had been a dying world 3 months ago was now the beating heart of the galaxy's largest military alliance. Human engineers had constructed massive shipyards in orbit, while Zephyrian architects had designed elegant command facilities on the surface. Species that had never worked together before were collaborating with an efficiency that amazed everyone involved. "Admiral," Captain Sarah Chen reported from her position at the communications console. Yes, she was the adult daughter of little Sarah Chen, and she had volunteered for military service the day after her sister's rescue. "We're receiving a priority transmission from the Liberation Fleet. Admiral Martinez reports that the siege of Proxima Station has been successful. The Dominion garrison surrendered after our Deltan allies infiltrated their command center." Hassan smiled. Admiral Martinez was the same Dr. Martinez who had helped rescue Sarah Chen from the slave ship, and she had proven to be one of humanity's most effective military commanders. Her speeches about honor and sacrifice had inspired an entire generation of rebels across the galaxy. "Excellent. Signal Admiral Martinez to proceed to the Altair system as planned. The Dominion's remaining strongholds won't hold out much longer." Admiral Subcommander Thelwyn's voice came from across the command center. "We're also receiving reports from our intelligence network. The Dominion is experiencing increasing difficulty maintaining control over their core systems. Several planetary governments have secretly contacted us about switching sides. How reliable is this intelligence?" "Very reliable. The source is impeccable. Emperor Zarketh's own nephew, Prince Veltar, who apparently disagrees with his uncle's policies." Hassan raised an eyebrow. Royal family members defecting to the rebellion, the Dominion Empire was collapsing faster than anyone had dared to hope. But the humans hadn't forgotten the original reason for this war. In a special ceremony aboard the flagship Indomitable, President Vasquez had commissioned a new class of vessels, the Kailes-class hospital ships. These vessels, built with both human and Zephyrian technology, were designed specifically to provide medical aid to civilian populations caught in the fighting. "Commander Kailes gave his life to save a single human child," President Vasquez had said during the dedication ceremony. "These ships will save millions of lives in his honor, regardless of their species or allegiance. This is what we mean when we say that humanity protects those who need protection." The gesture had an enormous impact across the galaxy. Even some Dominion worlds began requesting aid from the human-led alliance, and several Imperial commanders quietly arranged ceasefires to allow the hospital ships to evacuate civilian populations. It was during one such mission that Captain Elena Vasquez, the president's daughter who had also volunteered for service, made a discovery that would change everything. The Ahamas Compassion, a Kailes-class hospital ship, was responding to a distress call from a Dominion mining colony in the Tau Ceti system. The colony had been caught in crossfire between Imperial forces and local rebels, and hundreds of civilians needed emergency medical attention. As the ship's medical teams worked to save lives, Captain Vasquez received an unexpected visitor. War Master Kralex himself, badly wounded and barely alive, had been brought aboard by his own troops. Captain, the ship's chief medical officer, Sarah Kim reported privately, "The patient in Isolation Bay 3 is the Dominion's supreme military commander. He's suffering from massive internal injuries and cybernetic system failures. Without immediate surgery, he'll die within hours. And with surgery, we can save him. But Captain, he's responsible for the deaths of millions of people across dozens of worlds. He's a war criminal by any reasonable definition." Captain Vasquez stood quietly outside the isolation bay, looking through the transparent barrier at the dying War Master. The mechanical commander who had terrorized the galaxy was reduced to a broken figure barely clinging to life. "Dr. Kim," she said finally, "what would Commander Kylus do?" The doctor was quiet for a moment, then smiled. He would save him, wouldn't he? Regardless of who he was or what he had done. Then that's what we're going to do. Begin surgery immediately. The operation took 8 hours. Dr. Kim and her team worked tirelessly to repair the War Master's damaged organs and replace his failing cybernetic systems. When they were finished, Kralex was stable, but would require weeks of recovery. When the War Master regained consciousness, he found himself staring up at Captain Vasquez's concerned face. For a moment, his damaged memory systems couldn't process what he was seeing. "You're human," he said, his voice weak but still carrying that mechanical quality. "Yes. You saved me. Yes. Why?" Captain Vasquez pulled up a chair beside his bed. "Because someone once told us that the protection of innocence supersedes all other concerns, even our own lives. You were dying, War Master. At that moment, you were innocent of anything except needing help." Kralex was silent for a long time, his enhanced brain struggling to process this information. In the Dominion Empire, enemies were destroyed without question. Mercy was weakness. Compassion was folly. "I have killed millions," he said finally. "Yes, you have. And you'll have to live with that. But right now, you're alive because a human medical team chose to save your life rather than let you die. What you do with that life is up to you." Over the following weeks, as the War Master recovered, something extraordinary happened. Captain Vasquez visited him daily, not as an interrogator or a captor, but simply as one being speaking to another. She told him about Commander Kylus, about little Sarah Chen, about the philosophy that drove humanity's war against the Empire. "You fight for abstract concepts," Kralex observed during one conversation. "We fight for the idea that there's something in the universe worth protecting," Captain Vasquez corrected. "Something beyond mere survival or dominance. And you believe this is achievable? We believe it's worth trying to achieve." Commander Kylus believed it when he saved Sarah. Sub-Commander Thelwyn believed it when he rammed your flagship. Millions of beings across the galaxy believe it when they risk their lives fighting for freedom. The War Master's recovery coincided with a series of devastating defeats for the Dominion. The Liberation Fleet had captured 3 major shipyards and was advancing on the Empire's secondary capital. Entire sectors were switching sides daily, and the Imperial military was in full retreat across multiple fronts. Emperor Zarketh called an emergency council meeting in his throne room. The assembled governors and military commanders painted a picture of complete systemic collapse. "The humans have done more than defeat us militarily," reported Governor Thexkar of the Core Worlds. "They have defeated us philosophically. Our subject species no longer fear us because they've seen that we can be beaten. More importantly, they've seen an alternative to our rule." "What kind of alternative?" the Emperor demanded. "Hope, Emperor. The humans offer hope instead of fear, cooperation instead of domination, protection instead of exploitation. Their Galactic Freedom Network provides medical aid, educational resources, and defensive technology to any species that requests it. They ask for nothing in return except that those species treat their own people with basic dignity." Another governor spoke up. "Emperor, we are receiving surrender requests from our own commanders, not because they're being defeated in battle, but because they want to join the human alliance. They believe the humans represent a better future for the galaxy." Zarketh stood from his throne, his rage building to dangerous levels. "Are you telling me that our own people are defecting to the enemy?" "Yes, Emperor," including... The governor paused, clearly afraid to continue. "Including who?" "Including War Master Kralex, Emperor. He transmitted a message from the human hospital ship yesterday. He has formally requested amnesty in exchange for providing strategic intelligence to the Liberation Fleet." The throne room fell silent as the implications sank in. The Dominion's supreme military commander, the being who had conquered more worlds than any other in Imperial history, was switching sides. But when they finally received Kralex's message, it contained something none of them had expected. To Emperor Zarketh and the Imperial Council, I have seen the face of our enemy, and it is not what we thought. The humans do not fight like us. They do not conquer like us. They do not rule like us. They fight to protect others, they conquer only those who threaten the innocent, and they rule by offering hope instead of demanding submission. I have spent my entire existence believing that strength was measured by the ability to destroy. The humans have shown me that true strength is measured by the willingness to sacrifice for others. I cannot continue to serve an empire that rules through fear when I have seen what it means to serve a cause that rules through hope. I am defecting not because we are losing, but because we deserve to lose. The galaxy deserves better than what we have given it. War Master Kralex, Commanding Officer, Galactic Liberation Fleet Medical Corps. The message included detailed intelligence about Dominion fleet positions, supply lines, and defensive strategies. But more importantly, it included a formal challenge to single combat between Kralex and the Emperor, a traditional Dominion method for settling disputes of honor. "He's challenging me," Zarketh said quietly. "Emperor, you cannot accept," advised his chief counselor. "It's clearly a trap." But Zarketh was already thinking beyond the immediate tactical situation. The Dominion Empire was dying, torn apart by forces it couldn't understand or combat. Perhaps it was time to face the reality that their 1,000-year reign was ending. "Prepare my personal ship," he ordered. "I will meet War Master Kralex in neutral space. If I am to lose my empire, I will at least face my enemies with honor." As news of the coming duel spread across the galaxy, something remarkable happened. Species on both sides of the conflict declared temporary ceasefires to observe the combat. The outcome would determine more than just the fate of two individuals. It would symbolically decide whether the age of tyranny was truly ending. In her quarters aboard the indomitable, little Sarah Chen, now 8 years old, and visiting her sister, sat with Sub-Commander Thelwyn as he told her stories about Commander Kylus. "Will the fighting stop soon?" she asked with the innocent directness of childhood. Thelwyn smiled, his blue-scaled features gentle in the soft lighting. "Your people have shown the galaxy something it had forgotten, that there are causes worth fighting for and that fighting for the right reasons can actually end wars rather than just win them." "I hope so," Sarah said, hugging her new toy robot, "a gift from the Zephyrian children on the surface. I want everyone to be safe like Commander Kylus wanted." As she spoke, neither of them could have known that across the galaxy, the final act of the drama that had begun with one alien sacrifice was about to unfold. The duel between the Emperor and his former War Master would determine not just the fate of the Dominion Empire, but the future of galactic civilization itself. The neutral space between the dying Dominion Empire and the growing Liberation Alliance was marked by a single asteroid, a chunk of rock barely a kilometer across, floating in the void like a monument to the cosmos' indifference to the struggles of mortal beings. It was here that the fate of the galaxy would be decided by ancient tradition. Single combat between Emperor Zarketh and his former War Master Kralex. Ships from both sides maintained respectful distances, their weapons powered down in accordance with the formal dueling protocols. Human vessels sat alongside Zephyrian craft, while Dominion dreadnoughts held position near Corvani destroyers. For the first time in over a year, the guns were silent across the galaxy. Admiral Hassan stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching the tactical display with grim fascination. "Never thought I'd live to see the day when the Emperor of the Dominion would agree to single combat with a defector." "Zarketh is many things," Sub-Commander Thelwyn replied, his melodious voice thoughtful, "but he has never been called a coward. Perhaps he believes that if he defeats Kralex in honorable combat, it will restore some legitimacy to his rule. And if he loses, then the Dominion Empire dies with him. Their succession laws are clear. If the Emperor falls in formal combat, his heir must first defeat the victor before claiming the throne. Since Prince Veltar has already defected to our cause," Hassan nodded grimly. "Either way, today would mark the end of an era." On the asteroid's surface, two figures faced each other across a flat expanse of ancient rock. Emperor Zarketh wore the traditional armor of his lineage, black metal inscribed with the achievements of 40 generations of rulers. His weapon was the Dominion's ceremonial sword, a blade that had been forged from the hull of the first conquered starship. Opposite him stood War Master Kralex, his cybernetic enhancements gleaming dully in the starlight. But instead of his usual military appearance, the former Dominion commander had chosen to wear simple white robes, the traditional garb of one who seeks redemption through combat. His weapon was equally modest, a standard plasma blade, the kind carried by any soldier in the Liberation Fleet. "You look different, old friend," Zarketh observed as they began their ritual circle around each other. "The humans have changed you. They showed me what I could become instead of what I was," Kralex replied, his mechanical voice carrying an odd note of serenity. "I spent centuries believing that power came from the ability to destroy. Now I understand that true power comes from the willingness to protect. Philosophy will not save you in combat, War Master. We shall see, Emperor." The duel began with explosive violence. Zarketh was a master swordsman, trained from birth in the deadly arts of the Dominion nobility. His blade moved like liquid mercury, striking from impossible angles with lethal precision. But Kralex had been rebuilt for war, his cybernetic reflexes faster than any organic being could match. For long minutes they fought across the asteroid's surface, their weapons throwing sparks that glittered like stars in the vacuum. Zarketh's superior skill was matched by Kralex's enhanced speed, creating a deadly ballet that held the entire galaxy in suspense. Aboard the various ships, beings from dozens of species watched the combat with rapt attention. On the human hospital ship Compassion, Captain Vasquez stood beside her medical team, ready to provide aid to whoever survived. On the Zephyrian vessel New Dawn, Elder Chantel whispered prayers to the ancient spirits of his people. Even on the Dominion flagship Iron Fist, the crew watched with a mixture of loyalty and uncertainty. The turning point came when Zarketh managed to land a devastating blow across Kralex's chest, his ceremonial sword cutting deep into the cybernetic warrior's torso. Sparks flew from damaged systems, and blue blood, the color of nobility in the Dominion hierarchy, stained the asteroid's gray surface. "You were always my greatest creation," the Emperor said as he raised his blade for the killing strike. "It is fitting that you should die by my hand." But instead of falling, Kralex did something that no one expected. He smiled. "Emperor," he said, his voice growing weaker as his systems failed, "do you know what the humans taught me about strength? Spare me your deathbed philosophy. They taught me that the strongest thing a warrior can do is choose what he dies for." Kralex's plasma blade flickered and died, leaving him defenseless. "I choose to die for the principle that no child, human, Zephyrian, or even Dominion, should live in fear of tyrants." Zarketh hesitated, his sword poised above the fallen War Master. In that moment of pause, something shifted in his expression. For the first time in decades, the Emperor of the Dominion looked uncertain. "You would die for alien children?" "I would die for any children, Emperor, because that is what Commander Kylus taught us. That is what little Sarah Chen represents. That is what the humans have been fighting for all along. Not conquest, not glory, but the simple idea that innocents deserve protection." The Emperor's blade trembled in his hands. Around them, the vacuum of space seemed to hold its breath. "Get up," Zarketh said quietly. "Emperor?" "Get up, War Master. I cannot kill a warrior who fights for such a cause." Kralex struggled to his feet, his damaged system sparking. "Then what will you do?" Zarketh looked around at the ships surrounding their tiny battlefield. Ships from dozens of species, all united by the human ideal of protection through strength. For the first time in his long reign, he saw something other than conquest and domination. "I will surrender," the Emperor said, letting his sword fall to the asteroid's surface. "The Dominion Empire is finished, but perhaps something better can take its place." The transmission that went out to both fleets was simple and direct. "This is Emperor Zarketh. I formally surrender to the Galactic Liberation Alliance and request terms for the peaceful integration of all Dominion worlds into whatever governmental structure the Alliance deems appropriate. The Age of Empire is over. Let the Age of Cooperation begin." The silence that followed was profound. Then, gradually, cheers began to echo across the communication channels. Human voices mixed with Zephyrian songs, Corvani harmonics, and the clicking celebrations.